What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, we've seen some pretty ridiculous file sizes from different games, and now we're even seeing this happen with upcoming releases, which might even be too big to have a true physical release. We'll talk about that, though, here today. Also, we are going to be taking a look at that Microsoft Activision deal again, this time, though, involving Nintendo being called in, and we'll also be going over Destiny 2, how a lot of fans are pushing back, and now asking for Destiny 3. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're gonna start today with an update from a previous story that included Cliff Bleszinski and Lawbreakers, which we discussed here very briefly, an outing for a game that was basically a hero shooter at a time where there were just so many of them, and it kind of got lost in the shuffle and was shut down in about a year's time. But it appears maybe it could be coming back. And this was alluded to by Cliff Bleszinski when he had been fielding a call from his lawyers about people calling around the trademark for Lawbreakers. Well, take a look at this over on Twitter, where he says, turns out Nexon does own the rights to Lawbreakers. And then he does have an @ here for Owen Mahoney. How about sliding into my DM so we can talk about a resurrection? Now, Owen is a CEO at Nexon, and I mean, this is his shot right here, just saying, hey, let's see if we can revive Lawbreakers and take another run at it. And I feel like there are a lot of things that could be learned from its previous outing that, let's face it, was, again, you'd look at it as a failure, obviously, for what happened. But now we have a bit more data when it comes to the live service, especially on the side of hero shooters, battle passes, all these different things. It's changed quite a bit over the last 6 or 7 years, so maybe they could make Lawbreakers work, but it appears a lot of this hinges on Nexon and if they want to bring it back in the first place. Also, it looks like the Mario movie is on a crash course for that $1 billion mark at the box office, and of course, Miyamoto continues doing his rounds with press and media, basically declaring victory on the very successful Super Mario Bros. Movie. But he has been asked about what could be next for Nintendo and the big screen, and we can see this posted up. This translated by VGC, with the original interview being with Nikkei, where he says, please keep an eye on our next production. This time Mario is the focus, but Nintendo is like a talent agency. We have many other entertainers on our roster. Now, obviously, you would assume that the next thing that they'll move towards after the Super Mario Bros. Movie with Illumination would be a sequel to the movie because it was very successful. We've seen Illumination do it with Despicable Me as an example, where they just kept going with them and they were continuing to be successful, and then they get the whole Minions movie and all of that. But in this case, Nintendo does have a lot to pull from, Miyamoto comparing it to a talent agency, and while the Super Mario Bros. Movie was good, I would like to see them do something else. And I understand the popular take would be Zelda, sure, but I think it'd be kind of fun to see Metroid on the big screen, kind of have that a very different tone compared to the Super Mario Bros. Movie. But there are a lot of options out there, and I am curious to see which way Nintendo takes us next because, yeah, trust me, a lot of different companies are beating down Nintendo's door right now, trying to get a piece of their intellectual properties to make the next movie or series. Oh, and I've discussed different deals for storage on things like SD cards and the PlayStation 5 with that SSD, and I wanted to point one out now because something people will ask about would be the heatsink and which one you get, because the ones on sale don't come with the heatsink, but now you can see this over on Amazon with a Crucial P5 Plus, which is specifically advertised for that PlayStation 5, being marked down heavily for the 2TB model, and I've seen it as low as like $125. It's been fluctuating quite a bit, up to 56% off, even down to $142, and that's with Prime shipping and everything. And it does have a heatsink as they're advertising here, but it would meet the read-write minimums for the PlayStation 5, and that's just the big advantage that the PS5 has right now is it's open to the free market, whereas the Xbox doesn't have that luxury. They're kind of stuck to the proprietary expansion card. But certainly a good one to pick up here, but really you're seeing NVMe drives for the PS5 drop in price all over the place. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a release that's coming up actually this week that I'm really excited for, and that's Jedi Survivor, the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order. Again, a game that I really enjoyed, and well, as I've been looking forward to this, I of course have been keeping an eye out for any different previews or information as we're getting closer to release day this Friday. Something popped up though when it comes to the box art and immediately made me think about the all digital future, sure, but also how we are already outgrowing these 100 gigabyte Blu-ray discs. Yeah, the PS5 and the Xbox Series does have like the ultra high def Blu-rays, and they can hold up to 100 gigabytes. Mark Cerny mentioned this during one of his briefings where he went over all the different things about the PS5 and even talked about the shape of your ear. But he mentioned the storage medium allowing 100 gigabytes, which at the time, I mean, most of us looked around and said, okay, that should house most of these games. And for the most part, it has, with the weird thing like Call of Duty shipping with basically a launcher at 70 megabytes, then you gotta download the other 200 gigabytes or so. But take a look at this screenshot here that was posted up online as someone did grab a picture of two of the box arts, which, yeah, I mean, you work at a store and you get them in early. I guess they wanted to snap a picture, post it, but something else caught everyone's eye, and that's right above the ratings label on the front, where it says download required. And well, if you know anything about the Switch, you're immediately having flashbacks to the big blue banner that used to pop up on the front of the case, letting you know that half the game was on the cartridge, if that, and then you download the other half. But now we're seeing it here really pop up for something like Jedi Survivor, which is a single player game. And this kind of makes sense, and it was something I started to consider. I said, well, how are they going to make this work? Because we talked about the file size last week. It's 150 gigabytes or so on the PS5, and even on the Xbox Series, it's just over 140 gigabytes. We're still trying to figure out why that is. Maybe a lot of uncompressed audio. Maybe they're using like full motion video that are really high quality. Maybe the game's just really, really big, but 150 gigabytes would not fit on that 100 gigabyte disc, obviously. So my first thought was, oh, maybe they'll go to 2-disc format, similar to what Red Dead Redemption 2 did. Remember, you got 2 discs, one was an install and the other one was a play disc. Or they'll go this route, basically the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 route, where you still have to download some sort of chunk of the game, and they very well could be launching with maybe a gigabyte, if that, on the disc, and then you download everything else. And I'll admit, it does make me think that as we go along through this generation, we will see physical releases in general kind of decline, and you'll see more of this happening, where if you're over 100 gigabytes for your game, you're not going to ship with 2 discs. You're just going to, well, have more control through way of an excuse of file size, to where if this leaked, for example, you're not playing it until they turn the servers on, and you can get that required download. And it's something that's even been mentioned by Sony Santa Monica, where we saw Cory Barlog say, well, it actually would like that launcher now, because if the game leaks early, it won't matter. And that's kind of where we are with some of these titles. So I am curious about Jedi Survivor and what exactly is required for this download. Is it maybe the other 50 some odd gigabytes that can't fit on the disc and it's overflow, or are you legitimately popping the disc in and it comes up and says, hey, you're downloading 148.9 gigabytes? We'll see as we go along, because there are different Twitter accounts and sites that track this kind of thing, and I'm just really interested going forward if this is something that we see become more and more of a trend. Next up, let's talk about that Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal once again. This time, though, with the focus on Nintendo, because you'll remember Nintendo and Microsoft came to that 10-year agreement that they inked, and it was clearly set up just in time for Microsoft to present in Europe about everything that was going on across the world, which included them standing up on stage with like an 80-20 market share chart, with Sony being the big piece of the pie and all of this. But they did have that deal signed, so it just added more to the case against, Sony blocking it, and they also had the NVIDIA deal. But it looks like the FTC is interested in maybe some of the fine details for that agreement. We can see this posted up over on Tweaktown. It says the FTC has subpoenaed Steve Singer, Nintendo of America's Vice President of Publisher and Developer Relations, to deliver up to 7 hours of testimony. That sounds like a long day, to the FTC's complaint counsel. Singer was the Nintendo executive who negotiated with Microsoft to iron out the 10-year Call of Duty licensing deal, which began all the way back in December 6th, 2022, when the two companies signed a letter of intent regarding the deal. Now, Nintendo is pushing back here, where they say legal counsel alleges that the FTC did not order the subpoena until it learned that Singer was the Nintendo executive responsible for negotiations with Microsoft. The FTC asked for the identity of Nintendo's negotiator on March 16th, and then served the subpoena on March 29th. Both the identity request and subpoena serving were made after the case's subpoena deadline of March 3rd. So Nintendo obviously arguing against that because they missed the deadline, whereas the FTC says it's pertinent information. And the thing with this is, one, Nintendo is fairly secretive, so it's not like they want to go out there, send someone out there who'd have to sit in front of the council for 7 hours of live testimony where maybe they say something they're not supposed to, or they get tripped up, or a lot of things can go wrong, right, is what we'll say. But also, if that information gets entered in, we would probably see it published at some point, and, well, they would probably redact quite a bit of it. But there's always that little bit that doesn't get redacted fully, whether it's a word or a line is left in, and they can kind of figure things out. Like right now, part of a redacted segment for Xbox, when they were doing everything with the CMA and the EU and all this, mentioned a 10-year project or a game sequel that could take 10 years to develop. And of course, people start speculating on that. But I would be curious if we would get any indication as to how this 10-year plan is going to work out with Call of Duty and Nintendo, because many people are wondering, is this going to be a native port of Call of Duty, or is there some leeway to where it could be cloud-based? Is it going to show up on the current Switch, or is this something that's set up for Nintendo's next platform? So that's really what I would be curious about here. And obviously the FTC wants to know themselves, as they're still working to build their case to sue and block and all this with Microsoft. Although we're looking to see if the CMA is just going to approve this deal outright this week. And if they do, that'll most likely be putting pressure on the FTC to kind of step aside and let all this go through, which I still think will happen. Most likely in May, just ahead of that June deadline, or promise basically that Microsoft has made. So we'll see going forward, but I have a feeling in this case, Nintendo is probably not going to have someone show up in front of the council for 7 hours just based on the way they've responded. Next up, let's talk about something that was kind of strange with Advanced Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. This, of course, releasing on Friday, which still waiting for mine to show up. I did that thing with Amazon where, I trusted them for release day shipping. Terrible idea. It'll be here this Wednesday, but it appears people are having a hard time when it comes to redeeming those gold points with Nintendo, where you can do that with the physical copies and all this as well. But the game's was of course delayed for more than a year, which means you're technically expired with those gold points. You can see this posted up over on Twitter from Vooks, who noticed this, and they say Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp was delayed so long you can't redeem its My Nintendo gold coins. Now, you can redeem them in Europe and South Africa, and that's because you have 2 years of the game's original release date, whereas in, for example, the US, you just have 1 year, and of course, we are now outside of that 1 year date or that 1 year time period, so it just says, hey, you can't, it's expired. And I wonder if that's something Nintendo will figure out or work through with different regions, but we know that Nintendo, it's region by region. So in this case, for the US, Nintendo of America would have to show up and figure out a quick fix. I know it's like a couple of gold points or something, but still, it's something that you would expect, since, we didn't delay the game, Nintendo did, and you figure that they would have figured out how to make that work, because it was a very odd circumstance, obviously, for Advanced Wars, but it's out now, so I assume Nintendo will play around with something. Can they patch for gold coins? I'm not sure. Maybe they just basically see who was buying it or who was attempting to redeem the gold points, and they send out coupons. Maybe they send out coupons to a bunch of people. Hard to say there. But yeah, certainly an odd situation with Advanced Wars. Let me know if you happen to pick it up, and let me know if you were someone who also had the same issue with Amazon. This seems to be happening actually quite a bit recently, not just with Advanced Wars, but with a bunch of different games. And in our last bit of news, let's talk a bit about Destiny 2. And I really want to get the big Destiny fans out there what your opinions are around this, because we've seen these live service games just be ongoing for a while with all these different expansions, and you do wonder if it gets to a point where people are just ready for the next game in the overall series, like a clean break, and they're ready to move on, or if they're concerned about losing all the stuff that they've accumulated over the last half decade plus. Well, it looks like currently there are quite a few people within the Destiny community that are actually calling for Destiny 3. Like, you can see this posted up. This one over on Twitter from the Destiny Show said, unpopular opinion, Destiny 3 needs to happen. I don't think that's unpopular because it got a ton of likes, a ton of views, and I even saw Destiny 3 trending like over the course of, well, the end of last week into the weekend, and that was happening on and off quite a bit. And they had Lightfall that came out. It seemed like a big launch, but I did see a lot of people on Twitter, on my timeline and comments, kind of just complaining about the expansion. And then we saw Bungie come out and say that they missed the mark. And that was earlier in April or right at the end of March when it comes to the overall quality of that expansion. And you know what's interesting about this? I'm just not that compelled to play Destiny 2 right now. And a lot of it has to do with me falling out of it for a while and just feel like I'm too far behind that I don't want to jump in now to work through everything. But I would be interested in Destiny 3 because it would feel like a clean break and a fresh start. While it doesn't necessarily line up, I'm sure, with people who have accumulated some really cool stuff in Destiny 2, you do wonder with some of these developers who have attached to this live service model, when is the time to just clean break, cut it off, and go on to the next one? Because you would have to be developing that for a while anyway, and you're basically just hanging out in the background wondering when it's time to launch it. Because now with these live service games, we're kind of expecting them to not even need to be in a beta process, just to come out, especially with a Destiny 3, and be ready to hit the ground running day one. They can't really have something like Lightfall happen for their big Destiny 3 release. So it's certainly a tough thing to navigate here for Bungie, but with fans now really looking towards Destiny 3, I am curious though of the fans, like I said, out there now maybe watching. Let me know your thoughts down below if you would like to see Destiny 3 launch, or do you want to see them continue on with Destiny 2 with more expansions? And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, what's the next big movie you would like to see Nintendo attempt? Yeah, I figured it'd be Zelda, 55%, obviously. That's the big one people are looking towards now. But what I was really curious about where the other votes would fall, and Metroid is the next one up. I like the idea of Metroid as a big screen adaptation, but I don't know, would Metroid work better as a series for a big streaming service where we get 8 to 10 episodes out of it? And they maybe can be a bit more liberal with some of the content in it, right? It doesn't have to be as maybe family friendly as you would see with the Super Mario Bros. Movie, something like that. And I was also a little surprised Splatoon was at the bottom of the list in terms of votes. I mean, a very popular IP from Nintendo. Maybe that's one that would work better as a streaming series as opposed to being a movie. But either way, Nintendo has a lot to pull from here, and I had a hard time just picking out which ones to put on this list. So if I didn't include one you were interested in, let me know down below. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Tommy. It says, nothing odd about buying a studio with talented individuals. Talent is hard to find. A whole bunch of talented devs in that studio. And there are, this at Firewalk, right? They have a lot of veterans from the industry that are a part of this studio. It's actually grown quite a bit as well. And you're right about the idea of acquiring talent, especially now. We're seeing games take longer and longer to make, so you only have so many people you can divide up between projects, and with talent going back and forth between larger publishers, and some even just completely fleeing larger publishers, you want to try to acquire as many developers and talent as you can and keep them happy so that they stay. And that was one of the biggest reasons that Sony, I think, took over $1 billion and just left it in incentives for people at Bungie to stay at Bungie after the acquisition went down. Because a lot of times you'll see acquisitions happen and then talent kind of leaves slowly, and times we'll see them just form a whole other studio. In this case, Sony, well, they decided to show up with, money, which does help to keep people on board. And that shows right now Sony is certainly very forward thinking about what they want out of some of these acquisitions, thinking, 5 or 6 years from now, they could be, big time support for just PlayStation Studios in general. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, whether it's Star Wars Jedi Survivor being too big for the 100 gigabyte Blu-ray disc, and do you think that's something that's going to become more common here going forward? Then also, what about Nintendo being called into court by way of subpoena to talk about this 10-year Call of Duty plan with Microsoft? Do you think they show up, and do you think we get some interesting information there? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.